Hey everyone, welcome back to a new way to museum. I'm Dr. Sternberg and I'm here with our education manager, Ian, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about some cool fossils. One of the things that we just got into the museum last week are some fossils that we received from another museum, and what's cool about them is that we know paleontology has been going on really since the 1800s as far as vertebrate paleontology, when the first dinosaur was found. And so the thing is, in the 1800s, we just had people that were interested in finding things in the ground and they dig them up, and the ways that we take care of fossils today is very different than when people would dig them up in the 1800s and early 1900s even. So the fossils that we received at the museum came from another museum where they had a collection of fossils that were likely collected by Charles Sternberg. And Charles Sternberg was one of the most famous dinosaur hunters in the history of the United States. And he started out in Kansas, and his son, George Sternberg, was at Fort Hays State University, and is why we have a Sternberg Museum of Natural History. So to have some fossils that were collected by his dad on his way up to collecting dinosaurs in Canada is pretty exciting. But having fossils collected in the 1800s and mounted in the 1800s means that they weren't necessarily cared for in the same way we would care for them today. So I think Ian would really like to show us a little bit about what these fossils are.
So we were very excited to get all these fossils in because of the likely connection to the Sternberg legacy. But we were a little bit surprised about the state of the fossils. So one of the things that we're finding is wherever these particular fossils were stored was not the best conditions, so we've got a lot of boxes that are coming apart. The other challenge is the focus when the Sternbergs were doing their thing was not necessarily the same kind of focus that we have today, as Reese was saying. And it was very common to replace missing parts of bone with plaster reconstruction. The Sternbergs were very good at that. So the first thing I wanted to know is how much of what we're looking at is actual fossil. And luckily for me, we have a piece of fossil that I was able to sort of pry out of the plaster. The Sternbergs would put the fossils in plaster for display or even transport back to the museum. So what I found is when I pulled this bone out, this is actually a couple of backbones, a couple of vertebrae from a mosasaur. And you can see on the top it's darker. They actually put some kind of paint or plaster coating actually over the bones. And then on the other side, this is the actual color of the fossil. So there's a lot going on here, and it'll be a challenge for us to figure out if we want to try to restore the fossil to as close to original as we can get, or if we want to focus more on the kind of display that they were doing when this stuff was dug out and brought in. So it's not often that we get to work on fossils that were collected more than 100 years ago. So it's been an education as far as technique goes when it comes to what they were interested in as far as what they wanted to show the public.
And it's fascinating because no matter when fossils were collected, they can be easily fall apart, they can disintegrate. So care of how we preserve fossils is really important, and it was always important. And what they did back at the time was really apparently sort of cover the fossils. Besides putting them in plaster, the exposed parts they covered with a little bit more plaster and then some paint. So you get a dark color, so it's preserving the bones underneath, but you don't actually see the bones themselves. And that's really interesting way of doing things.
So when we first started looking at this, we were confused because it's the wrong color for the kind of sediment. We've got a lot of chalk and limestone around here. So we weren't even sure if it actually came out of the chalk beds of Kansas. We were kind of questioning that. And when I was able to pop out this backbone and see the actual color, this is the right color. So there's a lot of information that is covered up here that I think will be really valuable. Fossil prep technique has changed a lot since I was a student. So when I was actively prepping as a college student 20 years ago, the methods we were using are very, very different than the students who are learning how to do fossil prep now. So you can imagine how much has changed over 120 years. You know, a lot of change in the way we approach things, and we know a lot more and know what to look for and have new ways to figure things out. So this is an interesting thing that happens when you inherit fossils that are really, really old. Well, that were collected a long time ago relative to us.
So it's pretty cool. You know, there's a lot of times that fossils are collected a long time ago, but they're not actually prepped up. They're left in jackets, and we work on them today, even though they might have been collected 50, 80, 100 years ago. But the Sternbergs were good about trying to get their fossils into places where people could see them. And so it really is a beautiful way of looking and seeing how fossil prep and display practices have changed over 120 years. And it's you know, there's actually never really any judgment because everybody does things the way that they were done at the time. And these guys were at the very beginning of fossil collection and fossil prep. They were like the originators of a lot of these processes. So it's pretty interesting, unique, and a great opportunity to actually see how much has changed through time and still have some amazing fossils. It just may take a lot of extra tender loving care by our staff.
We have a couple of choices to make too. So we received these in a timely manner. Our 25th celebration of the museum being in this current building is next month in March, in the middle of March. And we're hoping to put some of these out on display as part of our history. So our big question is, do we try to preserve the work as an historical artifact, or do we try to get the fossils out, clean the fossils themselves up, and preserve them as we do our current fossils that we collect ourselves, or do we do a little bit of both? I'm thinking we're probably going to do a little bit of both.
I think it would be kind of cool to be able to show these things, some of these fossils, with some fossils that George collected, you know, 50 years later than his dad, and things that we've collected in the recent past, to just people to focus on the amazing history of fossil collecting in Kansas.
Evolution of fossil preparation and techniques.
So anyway, thanks for joining us again for A New Way to Museum. Give us a like if you think we're have fun things for you to enjoy. And if you get a chance, and you're going to be in Hayes on March 15th, drop in the museum and check out our 25th anniversary of being out here in the Dome.